So welcome to Transform Gov. It's the Digital Government Podcast, and Transform Gov is part of the Ireland eGovernment Awards and is brought to you in association with Accenture. I'm Maeve Kneafsey, and on today's episode, we're tackling one of the most pressing issues facing public sector leaders today, cybersecurity. And before you start yawning, this is a very interesting subject, and we've got the best guests you can imagine. So from ransomware attacks to regulatory compliance and the risks that come with those, including remote working and everything else, our public sector CIOs have an awful lot to contend with. And to help make sense of it all, I'm delighted to be joined by two fantastic guests. First, we have Jacky Fox. She's the global lead for Accenture's security practice and a seasoned leader in helping organizations design secure, resilient systems at scale. And we're joined also by Chris Davey, who's security lead for Accenture Ireland, who works directly with Irish public sector organizations to help them manage day-to-day cyber risks and build stronger defences. So Jacky and Chris, after all that talking, you're both very welcome to Transform Gov.
Thank you.
So let's get started, because there's not exactly a shortage of questions for us to talk about or subjects to talk about. Let's start first with, I suppose, one of the most visible threats that we see around, which is ransomware. And Chris, I know I remembered you talking briefly with me about the devastating impact, as we all know, on the 2021 HSE. So I think it brought home the infrastructure issues and the risks. Have things moved on from that time?
Unfortunately, I mean, even today, ransomware is still one of the most prevalent threats out there. It still accounts for sort of in the region of 20% of attacks on large enterprises today. So it's still a really serious problem. I mean, we can look across the water today and see big parts of the UK retail industry, by the look of it, in significant disarray because by the look of it, something like a ransomware attack going on. So unfortunately, things haven't really progressed very far.
But I suppose there's more actors. I know that's the word I heard, and I read a lot about cybersecurity, a lot of actors involved, much more than before. Is that correct? That there's just more activity?
So I think it's evolved. I mean, different threat actors, as we call them, come and go. Law enforcement has made some really significant progress at times in the past couple of years, knocking some of these down, so taking them over and disrupting them. And it certainly does disrupt them for 6 months or a year. But unfortunately, it is an extremely successful business model, and we tend to see the rise of another group eventually in their place. So it really is, it's cat and mouse.
It's ongoing. And in terms of attacks we don't even know about, do you think there's a lot of money being paid out that we never even hear of, never gets into the public domain? Yeah. What do you think, Jacky? Are you seeing that?
Yes, very much so. Now, in Ireland, actually, it's an offence to pay in that situation.
Okay.
But in a lot of countries, it's not. And I think organisations really do consider it. Like if you're faced with having been hit with a catastrophic kind of cyber attack that has wiped out all your systems, and you cannot finance well the recovery operation, or you think you're going to be non-operational for a very long period of time, particularly if you're in manufacturing, I can see why people might be tempted to pay, but it is definitely the wrong thing to do. And we know that cyber criminals often come back for a second dip if you pay once. And we also know that even if you get a recovery key that they give to you, it is not a silver bullet. It does not, magically make all your systems go bing and start working again. You might get some of them back. You won't get all of them back. They'll be out of sync. You will have real issues anyway, So I certainly would have been very supportive of the Irish government stance when we were hit with the HSE saying, no,
we're not paying.
Yeah.
But does that put us in a better position? In other words, people say, well, look, we're not going to get paid because in Ireland they can't. Is it deterrent?
I'm not sure because I'm sure there are people in Ireland who have paid and who haven't disclosed the fact that they've paid. Like some organisations, like in public sector, it's very obvious. Like if something happens to you and your public-facing systems are offline, or if you can't process things that you're meant to be processing. But there would be other elements in society and other organisations where it might not be quite so obvious that something has happened. And, there's always plausible deniability in there, if people aren't making statements. I think we do find today, though, when people have a cyber attack, it is much more socially acceptable for people to come out and make a statement about what's happened to them. So if you make that statement and then say that you've paid, I think that's probably not really where the CEO wants to sit today.
Yeah. That you're right about the cultural change, because I know in years before, if it was attack, it was almost, well, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's a case of, better to say it publicly. It's not your fault. It's just a matter of not if, it's when,
Yes.
and how well you handle it, right?
Yeah, completely agree. And like we do still see examples of organizations who are a little bit quiet, or they're kind of, technical problems or something. And it never plays out well for them when they go down those lines, because it does come out eventually. And, you have a huge responsibility when you're like, networks and things are all interconnected these days. Infrastructure talks to each other. So like, if you have something in your environment, you have a huge responsibility to let other people know who are interconnected with you,
Of course,
that there's something going on, so that they can protect themselves. So like, it's like going out with COVID, like, and it's just not the done thing.
And of course, within public sector, more and more, the connections, we're trying to get rid of silos. So the connections and interconnections are going to be bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes.
So you can't just isolate yourself and deny or try and just kind of keep it quiet and handle it.
No, definitely not. It doesn't play out well.
Yeah. And in terms of infrastructure and legacy systems, that can be a real challenge, can't it? Because they're often not supported. They're not getting the up-to-date patches to help. How do you deal with that system? And what do you do in that situation?
I mean, I think, your first challenge is really to understand the extent of the challenge you have. So understanding the infrastructure and the assets that you have is your first challenge. And, good looks like staying up to date. So by the time you've gotten into a stage where you have legacy and a lot of it's out of date, you have this big technical debt challenge. So first challenge is to catch up to date, and then to stay up to date with that. It really is an enormous challenge. And you think sort of normally in most industries, you're probably spending 70% of your budget just to keep the lights on. So to accelerate that, you really are eating into, a small amount of discretionary spend that you have in any year. So I think it's very easy to understand how organizations get into that situation. Catching up is hard, but many organizations have done it. For example, other industries that have come under regulation over the last decade or two have been able to catch up, and it's taken them usually sort of 3 to 5 years of sustained investment, but they've done it. And I think to some extent, say the cloud can be a significant opportunity to help here. So
if you go back just one step for a second, so if you were a public sector team and you were saying, okay, we're really going to start handling cybersecurity, we're going to really try and build an infrastructure that supports us being able to defend ourselves, where would you start? What would be the most important things to look at?
I mean, I think if you were to ask me, like, what is the one thing that I would like to change in organizations, often it would be to get security involved at the beginning, because
it's a real Irish answer, isn't it?
Well,
I wouldn't start there.
in some ways, because by the time you have an estate that is massively out of date, you've got this catch-up exercise. But I think if you take a look at it holistically, take a risk-based view is always a good advice, to take a risk-based view. And, some things you may just be so urgent, you must fix them now with what you have. And then other things, again, perhaps you can put in place some mitigations, but other cases sort of engineer out of your estate over the lifetime, let's say, of a refresh cycle. So over 2-3 years, replace with a new secure approach over that time. I think that again,
kind of a
will tend to prove will tend to be absolutely, and kind of again build the new systems right from the beginning, because it is much, much easier to design something securely, design so it, for example, if we talk about zero trust or least privilege, but it's built really securely from the get-go, rather than retrofitting every time you discover something that's wrong.
You kind of your crisis management.
Yeah.
In terms of, globally, public sector or countries maybe where the public sector seem to have really got to grips with cybersecurity, is there such a country? Does it exist that we should be emulating,
We did see in Estonia had some very serious attacks on their public sector quite some years ago, and they took a very root and branch kind of approach to sorting it out. And today they would be kind of held in awe as being, a public sector that do things very well. I think a lot of public sector bodies have a real challenge around budget with what they need to do and the digital infrastructure they're being asked to put in place, and the kind of the manner in which they're being asked to serve the citizens of a country. So I think there's a huge challenge between those two things.
You have the budget is not there.
Yes.
The regulations are saying you must do it.
Yes.
And then you're trying to bridge this gap. I mean,
correct. And I think that it, like being a CIO in kind of public scenario today is not an easy jigsaw puzzle to play with, because you do have a limited budget and you need to decide between actually securing what you've got and maintaining what you've got, but pushing out to what kind of innovations you might need as well. And if you look at what's happening in the moment, and just to get back to what Chris was saying, about kind of legacy systems and how do you deal with that, the reality is the world that we're stepping into right now, where, kind of it's AI and kind of, agents are actually going to be going around instead of people looking for permissions.
AI agents, right? Just
AI
sure
agents.
Everybody knows, but just in case.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
So AI agents are going to be kind of moving around across people's networks. And I think unless people have done a really good housekeeping job over how they handle identities and knowing who, what, and where is doing something on their system, and also looking at managing the data they have on their systems and getting rid of what they don't want. But just that tight level of management, which is quite difficult on legacy systems, is really required to move into the next phase. And I think we're seeing a huge acceleration in that at the moment. It's happening really quickly. And so, the challenge of the CIO and the CISO today in public sector is many. And the budget isn't there for them to do everything. So the prioritization against whatever the strategy is in their department or their area is going to be very, very complicated for them to get through.
I know that and this is not unfamiliar, is it really a problem within the public sector, the difference between the aspiration, the regulation and the actual budget, and of course the talent. And I know that we've talked on with some of the winners of the awards from previous years, and often the innovation that comes within the organisation happens because they don't have the budget to do what they're being asked to do. So technology plays a role. So you must be seeing that on both the attack side and the defence side, that AI playing an exciting role, do you think, in terms of being able to really make a difference in defending and making sure that the organisation is more secure?
So I suppose we're seeing AI work really nicely from a defence space, like where it's augmenting humans, so that when you're getting all those kind of level 1 alerts that are kind of, going bing, 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 here's something to investigate, actually pulling up the right data for you to do your analysis and maybe giving you some, based on 100,000 of these that I have seen before, here's some things that this might be, support. So it is actually helping to speed up on a defensive perspective. And actually, I do a lot of work with the World Economic Forum, and we asked a lot of the really senior CISOs across the globe, who do you think is winning at the moment with AI, attack or defense? And they were pretty much saying that we think the defenders have it at the moment, but not for long. Everybody's thinking the pendulum is going to swing. And again, I go back to agentic AI and the ability for it to move around and actually have an attack strategy deployed. And so I suppose when we start seeing the criminal world training their models to do criminal activities, we do need to have the speed of response from a defense perspective that can act at the same speed as well. So that is something that not a lot of organizations have the facility for today. They have augmented support, but they don't have either the risk appetite for immediate response that's being generated by AI, or often the ability to do it with the tool sets and things they have.
Okay.
I think just one thing to add to that. We did a report last year, which is looking at sort of cyber and equity, and in the sense of how well different organizations are protected. And, whereas 5 years ago, there wasn't this huge gap between kind of the digital haves and the digital have-nots, really over the last 3 years in particular, this has really stretched. So organizations that have invested are relatively well protected and, starting to able to leverage and leveraging these new capabilities. And it is the organizations with less ability to invest, which is often in the SME sector, but I think it's not just the SME sector, are, they haven't invested in their defenses, and increasingly they are getting really badly damaged by these sorts of attacks.
Okay.
So it's, again, I think echoing that point, but as I think the gap to be able to leverage these technologies is really going to cause, I think, significant problems in the next few years if organizations aren't up to date.
Now, I have got to take a little break because there's very important people I need to thank, and there's also people to be reminded about how they enter the R&D Government Awards. So we're just going to take a really short break.
Through the power of cloud, data and AI, Accenture is helping the public sector by blending human ingenuity, technology and a delivery-focused culture to turn their ambitions into action. Be ready for any challenge by adopting a continuous reinvention mindset to deliver human-centric services that adapt and grow with your needs. Contact the team at Accenture to find out more.
So we're back after a short little break, and I'm talking here to Jacky and Chris from Accenture, and they were talking cybersecurity. So what is the weakest link? Where does the fault line usually lie that enables a cyber attack to take hold, I suppose?
So I think it depends. It depends a little bit on where you're starting, but the absolute table stakes, the basics are to know what you have and make sure that it's protected up to date. I mean, every consumer is getting this advice, but then for sophisticated organizations, to layer further defenses on top of that. So to understand all of their identities, to understand the data they have, that's well protected, to be monitoring for the important things that matter in their estate, and in particular to make sure that their defenses are strongest around those most important things. I mean, many years ago, when we started putting in networks, we often built flat networks. But these days that is very much a legacy approach, and increasingly you want heavily segmented networks where you've got, in some ways it's like an old-fashioned castle where you have rings of protection and choke points that the an attacker would have to move through, and that we have firewalls, monitoring, and we understand exactly what's coming through. So only the traffic and the connections that are needed can get through, and we really understand in depth what is going in and out of those choke points. So the weak points evolve, starting with
People?
from people often, yes, yeah,
emails.
Yeah,
Click, link,
absolutely.
download, open.
It is.
I mean, I've had this conversation with a friend of mine who's in cybersecurity, and I said, people, and so
it is people. Yeah, like
I
it is.
presume there must be ways that you've seen that really can deal with that. I mean,
so people have to be able to use whatever systems and infrastructure is in place. So they have to be able to pass through and give them permission to do things. And the thing is that you don't want somebody doing it with a piggyback, on their back, looking, kind of spying and doing whatever. And we do a lot of work in training people on, phishing emails. It is still, phishing, vishing, smishing, all the different ways through the different mechanisms. Now it's deep fakes.
Talk to us about deep fakes. What do you mean by deep fakes?
So deep fakes are typically where somebody is being impersonated, typically today by video, and often video conference. We have seen there was a fairly big attack actually in Asia, where there was a video conference call where someone is there talking to their colleagues and being instructed to do something, and they did it, and they did not smell a rat. And so,
transferred large amounts of money, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, 25 million. It was a big amount of money. And that's not what anybody wants to do with their day, is it?
No.
And how it turns out. So it is difficult to spot for a human, in the same way that a human finds it difficult to spot a really good phishing email. And now we're seeing the phishing emails being more spear phishing, as in they're targeted at an individual, they're customized by AI. We're seeing a lot of AI generated emails and phishing campaigns. The deep fake kind of, video style thing is much more precise. Like, it's not random. They're not going to send hundreds of them out. It's a very precise, targeted, orchestrated attack still. And from a defense side, there certainly are some tools that are being put in to spot things. And in fact, you often still will see the 6-fingered hand or the something that will tell you this was a deep fake, or that person had a third leg for a second, or something will tell you, or something will trigger. So I think if you think you smell a rat, presume you smell a rat. What's the worst thing that can happen? You've said, no, I'm not transferring, or I'm not doing whatever. And I think we need to trust our instinct there, but also, those traditional signs about the urgency, the seniority, all those things are the same in those attacks. So we just need to keep training people, testing them, putting them through their paces, and making sure that they fail. And if they fail, we give them more training. It's really all we can do, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I suppose it's an ongoing thing, because they get, people get better, whatever, the attacks become better, more sophisticated.
Yes.
And in terms of, that budget gap, right, between I don't necessarily have the budget to do it, and maybe I don't have the talent to do it. How are organisations in the public sector kind of dealing with that and closing the gap? What are you seeing?
I mean, I think probably two things. On the one hand, taking a risk-based approach, so understanding what are the things that they really need to protect, and if something were to happen, then what are the absolute priorities for the organisation? I think on the other side of it is, leveraging the new standards, the new governance that comes with that, to actually seek more budget commensurate with the new controls, the new
requirements,
level, new requirements that are out there. So, for example, as with the HSE, clearly it was very difficult beforehand to find and make budget and target it to this. Afterwards, it's possible, and I think increasingly and flowing from that. The government put in place a new public sector cybersecurity baseline standard that has been mandated, and that is driving activity across the public sector to uplift controls to meet that. Slow progress, but it is clearly happening.
And if you think of a smaller public organisation, that's obviously got smaller budgets. Are there any kind of hacks or tricks or ways of kind of trying to mitigate against massive expenditure, but at the same time, I'm looking for a placebo here, but at the same time to kind of get things protected?
So our National Cybersecurity Centre actually set up grants for smaller organisations to help them to, either have an assessment done, or to, kind of get training done, or whatever it is that they needed to do. But I think myself, in general, if you're a very small organisation, you are better off using something that is extremely public and, kind of really available. So why would you set up a perimeter with your own equipment and your own infrastructure that you're going to have to mind? If you're a small organization, go to the cloud, go to something that is well set up and well organized. Get people who know what they're doing to help you do any of the, configurations that you need to do in it. Get it checked, kind of put things in place to actually make sure it's being checked and monitored. And as Chris said earlier, understanding what your real assets are, focusing your attention in there rather than trying to peanut butter everything and do everything right. I suppose at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing, you're thinking about, well, am I serving a group of people? Do I have to be online for them? What happens if I'm not? Yes, it might be embarrassing, but does it really matter if I'm not online for a couple of days? Is it the data that matters, maybe? Is it that I really need to look after? So deciding what it is that you really, really, really have to put your arms around and care about is, in my mind, the most important thing. And if you don't know how to do it, ask somebody else to come and help you. And even in public sector, there's a lot of bodies of knowledge in there, interdepartmental. There's groups that people can join where they can share ideas and interconnect with different people who will help them, because everybody is very helpful and wants to help. The HSE was a great example. When we reached out to all the CIOs across the entire government and said, come and help, we need you to give your best people for a few days to actually help with this. Everybody just stood up and said, here, whoever you want. So people want to help when you've got a problem. So I think relying on that as well is good.
And of course, that's the advantage of the public sector. They're not competing with each other. Why not all get in and help?
Yes.
I have to take one final break for important announcements. We'll be back in 2 seconds, so don't go away. Right, I have to remind you that we have now a limited number of tickets, because although we're going to a bigger venue this year, which is the O'Reilly Hall for the Ireland eGovernment Awards, we really can't take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, but we can take you. So make sure you book your ticket as fast as possible.
Beautiful venue.
Absolutely stunning. And it's going to be great, because we're going to have the morning summit. It's going to be in the same venue, so nobody has to go anywhere else. They just come into the summit, and then we go straight from the summit to the lunchtime ceremony, which will be wearing the Taoiseach on Taoiseach. Micheál Martin is going to join us and he is going to present the winners with their awards.
And tickets are how much?
Tickets are, well, it depends. You can get a table or you can get a single ticket. So it depends on exactly how many you're purchasing.
But it's all on digital?
govawards.com. So digitalgovawards.com, where you can purchase your tickets. And it's really, really straightforward. But please don't be sad because you didn't get your ticket. Make sure you book it as quick as you can.
It is a great event and it's brilliant for networking. It's also great for social.
It is, but it's great. It's great fun. But I think we've found from people telling us why they love coming every year is because they get to hear of other stuff that's going on that's relevant to them, but they also get to network and make connections. I don't mean that in a kind of a naff way. Let's say you're trying to do something that somebody else has already done. Sure, why not meet them there? And then you can bridge a connection.
And we saw that last year.
We did. I forgot which one you're talking about, but I know it happens all the time.
Well, I was there when they were meeting and they said, we could do that with you.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. And the OGCIO will be there, which is really important as well because they can help everybody. So make sure you get your tickets and we want to see you there. And don't forget, Taoiseach will be there on the day because he thinks you're really important too.
And book now.
And thank you to Accenture, our sponsor, because none of this would happen without them. So we're back. Thank you. We're talking about cybersecurity here with Jacky and Chris from Accenture. So the cloud can help solve a lot of problems, I'm hearing. It certainly can reduce some of your costs, right? But then there's geopolitics issues, isn't there, involved? So, Jacky, what are you seeing happening? What are the do's and the don'ts?
Well, the world environment that we live in today is a very interesting and changing dynamic environment. So I think, we always feel comfortable sharing with our like-minded states or neighbours. But that is...
You have to know who they are.
You have to know who they are today, and you have to think about, are they going to be our friends tomorrow? Exactly, Maeve. So I think that has caused a lot of public sectors, not just in Ireland, but in many countries, to start considering, well, who's monitoring us? Where are we storing our data? Which cloud is it in? What happens when that one fails? Where's the failover to? And so they really are considering those things, and rightly so at the moment. It's very interesting, the advent of the tariffs, actually, what that has meant to what people's thinking about, what's my bill of materials for, System X? What countries am I relying on? Am I going to have a cost implication? Is there a third-party security implication in there? So there are a whole load of things that people are thinking about in third parties, and the cloud is a third party at the end of the day, and whether they need to secure it differently. So I think a lot of countries are thinking in a very sovereign way at the moment, and considering, who do I think I'm going to be friends with for life, and who maybe is friends today and maybe not tomorrow. And I think that has a big implication about how people are thinking about how they support their infrastructure, what type of infrastructure they're putting in place to do their daily business.
Because in theory, you could have an SLA or an agreement that somebody could renege on, depending on where their loyalties lie. I mean, I presume that's a possibility.
I presume so. I don't think that any service provider might deliberately kind of go, well, let's slow down Ireland and speed up, Gibraltar or something. I'm not even sure it would necessarily be in their kind of gift to actually do that. But in theory, you could. I think it's more an issue of the consumer thinking about, where is their data going and who might have access to it on a day-to-day basis, but also on the foot of a warrant, who might have access to that data, and how comfortable you would be about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the cloud is not the panacea though either. I mean, you get a very good service provider in the cloud. You like them, they're the right people, but you've got some jobs to do as well. You can't just pass over responsibility.
In some ways it's like, you have a house, and if you're the homeowner, well, you have to do everything, and you may choose to do your own DIY if you're capable, or you may have to pay to get somebody to do some work if, there's a leak somewhere. And as you move into the cloud, that you may now be a tenant. So, a lot of that will now be done for you to whatever standard you've agreed, and will be done extremely well and be done reliably, and whatever is needed to, per the discussion earlier, keep it up to date. But you've still got to remember to lock the locks that you've rented and to close the windows and so on, or you really do have a problem. The cloud, is somewhat like that. We talk about the security of the cloud, which now you've outsourced, and the security in the cloud, which you still have to have the expertise and skills to do. And so it can help with a very large part of this. And in particular to the investment and catch-up challenge discussed earlier, it can really help with that. But yes, there is a part you need to do.
I suppose when you talked about the kind of best practice and saying, okay, you know what's important, what your assets, what your most valuable assets are, concentrate on them. and you can get some help from third parties to come in and do that and kind of accelerate the front end work and then kind of try and keep it all in place as time goes on and keep on top, right, Jacky, of what's going on, because there's a lot of changes, isn't there, globally happening within cybersecurity. Both technology, approaches, attacks.
I think it's like for us sitting here, it's a very interesting time because the technology is changing. There's huge innovation, the impact of, automation and AI, the impact of the desire for a lot of data sovereignty. You throw all those things into the mix and you say, well, actually, the system I was probably operating 5 years ago, the system I have today and what I have in 5 years' time, the support are probably going to have no resemblance whatsoever with each other. So the whole thinking, the kind of identification of the risks that you're actually trying to mitigate with security, it's all really different. So I think staying on top of that is not far off a full-time job for a lot of people. And there's great services you can get that will provide you threat intelligence work day to day, and you can get that on a sectoral basis. Like for public sector, you can get it on a country basis, on a geography basis. So there's many different ways that you can look at that. And then also staying on top of technological innovations is very important for people as well, so that they know what's coming their way. And I think, unfortunately, you don't want to be necessarily always the first person, but you certainly don't want to be the last person coming off the legacy equipment either.
Yes. There's a final kind of question around the balance between transparency and security, isn't there? Because on the one hand, you want to make sure everything's secure. On the other hand, you have to open up information for freedom of information. So have you found that a challenge for people in terms of how they handle that, or is it not an issue?
I think it's a very interesting area. I suppose on the one hand, one of the great advantages that that we at large, the law-abiding community, have compared to criminals is we can share intelligence on what's going on. However, that while we want to share, so that other people can defend themselves, letting people know which of your own pieces of security may not be working perfectly is incredibly sensitive to most organizations. So it does require, saying earlier, sort of trust groups where we can trust to share these pieces, but but again on a very trusting basis with people who are like-minded. So I think, again, within the public service at large, that can work very well, even across Europe and again within the different countries there, we can share information quite well. But it is typically done again between groups that know each other well.
I think transparency and trust are very interesting areas. Like transparency, like with freedom of information that the public sector are all subject to, that it means you have to be mindful and thoughtful about what you're doing with government money and how you're spending it and what kind of projects you're doing, and making sure that you've actually thought of everything from A to Z to cover that off. So the transparency, I think, is it's built into our system in Ireland in particular. The trust element is something that's quite slightly different, and something that we're really seeing developing at the moment. Like, can you trust what you see? Can you trust what you read? Can you, a lot of people are getting their media and information from very different sources than it would have been 5 years ago. And we know that you tend to get into an echo chamber within that. So no matter what your area of interest is, you can end up in that chamber where you are trusting something that is feeding to you what you want to hear. And I think it's going to be very interesting how we deal with that problem, actually, to say, well, how do I know that what I'm looking at is true? How do I know that Maeve is actually sitting in front of me saying this and she's not a hologram that's been taken over by the world or something? Like that trust element is something that we need to bring it back to some kind of root, and probably some governmental trust in the way that we did with websites, to say, we had HTTPS from a certificate authority, which ultimately goes back to a trusted government source. Yes, it's not perfect, but it was kind of fairly good. So I think we're going to have to do something with information and that trust space as well, to go back to a trusted route.
And in terms of the work you guys are doing with public sector bodies, I know you can't talk about them individually. What are the areas that they're most concerned about? What are you kind of learning?
Most organizations go on a journey from starting with the very basics through to, when they've improved on that, then testing out how those defenses are learning often a bit more from that, learning how they might fare in if there was an attack, how would they be able to respond, and then again evolving further to improve. So that tends to be the journey that most organizations go on, and there are so many learnings along the way when you think you've done you invest doing all this hard work for a couple of years, and then you still find you have weaknesses and it's more work to do.
But you have a response mechanism and a way of responding, right?
Yes.
So it's not, we don't know what to do.
No.
It's okay. We have a plan.
We have increasing levels
plan, right?
of trust in what we have because we've tested it. And like everything in IT, when you test it, you know how good it is.
Exactly. So you get somebody who's really good to test it. Anything else we should cover before we close off? Because it's been such an interesting subject.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like state kind of actors. I suppose one thing that's probably relevant for public sector is, and it's something that's discussed, it's not an Irish thing, it's discussed in many countries, is, state-backed espionage. And about how, every single chip and piece of software that we use in our infrastructure and support, is, we really need to know every single thing that's in there, because otherwise, it could be from a source that you weren't expecting that could have some, for want of a better word, backdoor kind of built into it. So I think that is something that, is a concern for a lot of people. And deciding what information is, super, super secret and what information is secret and then what information is public, and treating them accordingly with the infrastructure underneath as well, because we do put access controls onto things appropriately, but maybe we're not thinking as much about the infrastructure that we're sitting them on. And I think that is something that needs to be considered, along with the many other gazillion things that we have to consider for public sector technology and security.
Exactly. I can imagine there will be a version, or should be a version of verification, certificates and stuff like that, because everything, and I think that's part of the Act, isn't it? Isn't there
the
Cybersecurity Act?
Correct.
Is that we're going to have certificates? So in other words, this piece of kit that I have has been verified that there isn't any little backdoor in there, and some standards that we'll have to kind of work around.
Probably. Yes.
Feels full of, I think we need to get some experts into the room.
So I think that a lot of that will be covered with many aspects, but some things are just too hard to see and too hard to get into.
Yeah.
Like, we
had
determined completely. Like we saw when vulnerability was out a couple of years ago, Log4j. Like there was places who were using software that had that vulnerability nested 32 layers deep into their infrastructure. Now, who is looking 32? I bought X, and underneath that there was a third party. Who is going into that level of detail, like on the systems that they have at the moment? So I suppose that's probably why I say there's probably one or two systems that you might need to identify that you might go into that level of detail with. And then you're hoping for the protection of the likes of the Cybersecurity Act that will sit over the top and give a good level of protection, but not a perfect level of protection.
Yeah. I mean, look, the fact is that we have to just be vigilant all the time. You can't be, nobody's going to be, what's the word? It can defend everything.
No.
Right? Against everything and every scenario. It's just being vigilant and having a system in place, right?
Absolutely.
And layers of defenses, and in particular knowing what are the most important things and making sure that the defenses are particularly strong around those.
Well, look, thank you so much. It's been really interesting. Thank you both, Chris and Jacky. And we will, I'm sure, returning to the subject, but that was really insightful. And thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So before I head off, I just want to thank the team here, as always. Thank you very much to Peter Rice, who's our studio manager, our video editor, Neil Horner, our sound engineer and videographer today, Lee Brennan, and of course, South Dublin Podcast Studios. And thank you both very much.
Thanks, Maeve.